Welcome to the She's Just Not That Into You podcast, where we're redefining female experiences and prioritizing female perspectives. I'm Rianne.
And I'm Jiyun. We are two friends with global background, sharing our multicultural experiences and discussing everything that sparks our passion.
Every week, we have honest, intimate conversations that we hope will inspire and empower not only each other, but women everywhere.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jiyun.
And I'm Rianne.
And today we are talking about everything you need to know about periods. So it's a topic that's such a big part of life for so many of us. And I just wanted to start off with something that's really wild to think about. So every single day, over 300 million women around the world are on their period. And every month, 1.8 billion people go through it. So it's basically one of the most natural and universal things out there, but we barely talk about it. So we thought it's a perfect topic for us to cover. And because no one is actually talking about it, there's just so much misinformation out there, especially among men, I think, about what periods are actually like. So, yeah. And more importantly, I think all the stigma around it makes something like period poverty worse, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, period poverty is when people don't have access to safe menstrual products, proper facilities, or even education about their own bodies and periods. So, this whole silence around periods, it only makes things worse. So, it reinforces things like myth, shame, and exclusion. So, it makes it a lot more difficult for us to actually manage our health. So, yeah, it's time for us to have this conversation loud and clear. And Rian, I'd like to start with the first question. And let's start with our personal stories. What was your first period experience like?
So actually, to be honest, I don't really remember.
Mm-hmm. Such a long time ago, right?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But I think what I remember most about periods during my teenage years was that at school, to get out of swimming lessons, we
Mm-hmm.
would often lie to the teacher that we were on our period and couldn't go swimming because of that. Because
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of us didn't like doing swimming lessons at school. So, yeah, I remembered that. This was when I was at an all
Hmm.
girls school. So, people were talking about their periods a lot and
Hmm.
pretty comfortable with talking about it. Yeah.
But I'm a little surprised that you don't remember about your first period. Like, it's actually one of the most memorable things, perhaps, that happened to us, right?
I know. I don't remember though.
Like, not at all, at all?
I remember like the time when I got my first period. I remember like it was the summer and I was taking tennis lessons like at this
Mm-hmm.
like tennis camp.
Yeah.
I don't really remember anything else though.
Oh my god, interesting. Yeah, I mean,
Do you want to share yours?
I mean, it's not that I remember every single detail, but I think it was about when I was 12 or something when I had my first period. I don't remember it super clearly, but one morning I woke up and I went to the bathroom and there was blood on my underwear or something like that. By the point, I already knew what a period was. So I think I was like mentally prepared myself for it.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, like instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm like dying, I just thought, oh, I just, started my period. It's there and this is it, right? But then I felt so embarrassed to even say out loud that I've started my period because,
Okay.
like, it was proof that I was becoming an adult,
Yeah.
like, or something like that. I'm going into womanhood, and I felt like I wasn't really ready to be seen that. So I really
Yeah.
couldn't bring myself to tell my mom about it. So for a few days or so, maybe even entire first cycle, I used toilet paper instead of a pad to survive the cycle, I think.
Oh my god.
without telling my mom. And because it was my first time, I think the flow wasn't really that heavy. And I just folded up a bunch of toilet paper and stuffed it in my underwear and just got through it like that. And of course, that wasn't really sustainable because, it's just layers of toilet paper, right? So
Yeah.
so the blood was sort of leaking through, right?
Yeah.
So one day, my mom must have seen some, I don't know, blood stain on my underwear or something. So she woke me up and told me that I started my period, and she just taught me how to use a pad. And that night, my dad came home with a dozen roses to celebrate my first period, which was really embarrassing, actually.
Oh my god.
I don't know about other countries, but like in Korea, it's common to give roses when a girl gets her first period.
I don't think British dads do stuff like that.
But I was so embarrassed. Like, think about it. I was just like a teenager, right?
Can you imagine a British dad going out to buy roses?
I can't imagine.
Oh my
Not
god.
at all. Oh my god. Yeah, it was embarrassing, but I mean, looking back, it was a really sweet moment. But so that was my first period.
Wow, so eventful.
Yeah. So that was our first period experience. And even though it's something that happens to more than 50% of the whole population across the world, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about periods and about women's bodies in general. Especially, we've been growing up seeing all these guys talking about all the dumb things about periods, right?
Yeah, it's so crazy because I feel like, people tend to think that period poverty is kind of like a third world issue. But in some sense, we have period poverty in like first world countries as well, right?
Yeah, of course. It happens everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually looked at some statistics, and it says that about more than 100,000 girls in the UK, they actually miss school each year because they don't have access to sanitary products. And that's period poverty as well,
Yeah, wow, that's crazy.
right?
Yeah, and not even just lack of access to proper menstrual products, but I also mean just in terms of lack of knowledge as well.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I think we all have poverty in terms of lack of knowledge around periods.
Especially among men, I think. I
Yeah,
feel like all the
definitely.
information is out there. Like, if you just Google it, there's every information that you need to know about periods, right? But then they don't really feel that they need to know about it, right? Because they treat it like it's not important, or it's something just that they don't necessarily need to be knowledgeable about.
Yeah, and even male doctors don't know about periods either.
Yeah, they don't really know about women's experiences when it comes to women's health and everything. Like, they just dismiss our opinions and they minimize our experiences.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So I actually signed up to this email newsletter by James Clear, who's the author of Atomic Habits. It's a really good email newsletter. I recommend it to anyone who isn't already signed up. But on one of the emails, he included this quote, which was advice from a biologist about how to do research. And the quote said, "Any observant local knows more than any visiting scientist. Always, no exceptions." And obviously, it's kind of a different context, but I think it really applies to women in healthcare getting gaslighted by male doctors as well. Because, a lot of the time, female patients who have, especially female specific health problems get gaslighted in medical healthcare by male doctors who think they know more just because they've studied the science behind it. But in this
Hmm.
situation, they're just like the visiting scientist and the female patient is the observant local. But, in the situation of women having female health problems, literally no one ever believes the observant local or believes that the woman knows more than the visiting scientist, i.e., the male doctor, which is so ridiculous.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so crazy because actually, there's 10 times more funding to do medical research into medications that increase male pleasure than there are into doing research about medications that alleviate female pain.
Yeah, that's so crazy. So crazy.
And if anyone's wondering what medications that increase male pleasure means, I think it's mostly stuff like Viagra to help with erectile dysfunction and stuff like that. But yeah, it's so
Hmm.
crazy that there's so much more funding to do research into that than
It's
there is.
nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, like half the world population experiences periods, but then there isn't a single painkiller that's specifically made for period cramps. Like, how does this
Yeah.
make sense? It's just so crazy. Like, all the medicine related to it, like, they just get lumped into the general painkiller category. Like, if I
Yeah.
go to the pharmacy and ask for something for period cramps, they just give me like a really general painkiller.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
crazy. I remember they mentioned that in the novel Kim Ji-young, born 1982 as well.
I don't exactly remember what it was though.
Oh, I think she just mentioned that it was that when she got her first period, she thought it was crazy that there was no specific medication for period pain. It's so crazy because she was, yeah, born in 1982, and I think she must have been like around 12 or 13 when she got her first period. So that would have been the early 1990s. And now we're
Yeah.
in 2025 and there still is no
No
medication for period
progress.
pain.
Right. So crazy. Like, I can get that, like, drugs that help with period pain, they can also work for other types of pain as well. But like, were it be men who had periods, it wouldn't be like this.
Yeah, it would be totally different if men had periods, especially when it comes to, cultural awareness. And, there's still kind of a lot of social stigma and shame related to
Yeah.
talking about periods. Whereas if it were men who had periods, then it would be considered as something to be proud of or seen as a great accomplishment to have gone through it.
Yeah, and going back to the topic, I think there is just so much misinformation and misunderstanding about periods, especially among men, because they don't
Yeah,
really have
definitely.
any idea about what it is actually like and what actually happens in our bodies and stuff like that. Okay, so first, when it comes to like misinformation, I know that a lot of men actually think that women bleed gallons of blood during their periods, which is not true at all.
Oh, really?
No.
So I remember when I was in biology class when I was in middle school, we watched this video where they were interviewing men on the street about their kind of assumptions about what periods are like. And then
Yeah.
one man in the video said that he thinks that women bleed 1 teaspoonful of blood every month.
Yeah, I think it really depends. But on average, I think women bleed about 1 to 5 tablespoons of blood during one cycle of period. So it's not like gallons of blood. It's not as much as we actually imagine.
Oh, 5 tablespoons is so low.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that little.
Yeah, because it feels like it's more when it comes through our body, right? It feels a
Yeah.
lot more, but it's actually not because it usually comes with other types of fluids as well, not just blood.
Okay, like water and stuff.
Yeah, probably. I don't know what type, but yeah.
Oh, okay, that's
Mm.
interesting.
I also heard that some men believe that we can actually hold it in.
Yeah, that is crazy.
We can't hold it in, guys. Like, it doesn't work like pee. There's no on and off switch for that.
Oh my god.
Like the blood flows out of our uterus through the cervix and vagina. There is no such thing to turn it on and off and stop the flow. So there's no such thing as holding it in, and there's no stopping once it starts. But we typically feel like it stops actually when we are in water. Like, for example, when we are in the shower or when we are swimming, we feel like our periods stop, right?
Oh, interesting.
Have you ever not experienced that before? Like, when you are in water, you don't bleed.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah.
I originally thought that it was like, oh, like maybe in the shower it just stop or something, but I heard that the pressure from water actually make the flow a little slower.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I didn't really think about it. I don't know, even if you're not in water, it's not like
Mm-hmm.
blood is always pouring out of you when you have your period, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like if you're just like standing without any pants on and you have your period, you're not like bleeding constantly, even if you're not in the shower. So
It's not something we can control, right?
Yeah, so because of that, I didn't realize that the water made a difference too.
Yeah, I heard that it's just gravity and just our, natural body system. They just take care of it really naturally. I also read online that some guys think that like the size of a sanitary pad is the same as the dress size.
Oh my god.
It's so crazy to think about, right? I never thought about it that way, but like, for example, if I wear like a size small, like they think that I'll buy a size small like sanitary pad.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with dress size. It's just about the amount of flow that we have.
Oh, so do they think it's like the equivalent of like condom sizes, maybe?
Probably, yeah, something like that.
And speaking of lack of knowledge around this topic, one thing that I really wish that we'd learned in school, either in sex education class where we learnt about periods, or maybe even in biology class, or just not even at school, but just in general. I really wish that I had learned earlier than I did about the changes that our body goes through during the menstrual cycle, and how, as women, we really need to learn to honor that in our lifestyle, and that we can't expect ourselves to perform the same every day, because the way we perform and just the way we feel and the way our body feels and everything just changes so much during the course of the menstrual cycle. And I know it's really difficult because society is set up to honor men's bodies and the biological rhythms and cycles that men's bodies go through, and society isn't at all geared towards what we go through as women.
Hmm.
Like I think it was only when I was in my mid 20s when I learned about all this. And, I learned that our society is set up in terms of 24-hour day, and, our work day from 9 till 5, for example, is set up that way because men's biological rhythms happen over the course of a 24-hour period. And the time between 9 till 5 is when their body is performing the best. Whereas for women, it's totally different because our biological rhythms happen over the course of 1 month. And at different stages during that month, we have different changes in our bodies, and the way we feel and the way we're able to perform and everything changes wildly based on that.
Yeah.
But the way our society is set up and the way our work culture is set up expects women to perform the same way every day, just like
Hmm.
men are able to do. And I only realized all this relatively recently, like I said, in my mid 20s, when I was listening to podcasts when they talked about all this, and they talked about how, as a woman, it's really important to pay attention to how you feel at different points in the menstrual cycle, and how it's important to adjust your behavior or your schedule accordingly so that you don't have to feel guilty or stressed if you find yourself unable to do certain things that you might have been able to do effortlessly at another time of the month. And,
Right.
that we can't expect ourselves to be the same way at every time of the month. So there was all this advice about how, if you're on your period or if you're about to get your period, which is the time when your body is the least energetic, you shouldn't try to start a new project then, or you shouldn't overcommit to social engagements because you're going to more easily feel burnt out. Whereas during the time that you're ovulating, that's when you're at your peak performance.
Hmm.
So that's the time that you are able to, start new things and fill up your calendar with more social engagements because you'll naturally just have more energy.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think we talked about this before, and you said that you feel like you don't really notice any changes in your body during the month, and you feel like you don't feel wildly different when you're on your period compared to when you're not.
Right. I think it just really depends on who we are talking about, but I normally don't really pay attention to how my body reacts during my period. But there are just a few things that I've noticed. Like, I always get like one or two pimples on my face around the time of my period. Like, my skin seems to be getting a lot more sensitive during that time.
Yeah, yeah.
Then I'll know that it's about time that I get my period. And
Yeah.
another thing is like a few days before my period starts, my boobs get bigger. So if I touch them and notice that they feel swollen, I know that my period is about to start in a few days. And during periods, like as for cramps, I only get them on the first and second day of my period. And those are also the days when my flow is the heaviest.
Yeah.
And after that, it's usually much lighter for me. How about you? Do you see any difference in your body before and after period?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm quite sensitive to
Yeah, I think you're a lot more sensitive to that kind of body changes.
Yeah, I noticed so many differences. Like,
Really?
yeah, I feel like I look completely different as well.
Oh, wow. Like how different?
I feel like, especially when I'm about to get my period, and maybe for like the first 5 days or so that I have my period, I definitely feel like I look worse in photos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so specific. I feel like my skin just doesn't look as good.
So interesting.
I mean, like, yeah, sometimes I'll like get a few spots, but even if I don't have anything like that, just like the texture of my
Yeah.
skin or like the color of my skin doesn't look as good.
It's so interesting. Okay, so if your skin like feels different and if you look different in the photo, do you like automatically connect that with your period and see like around what time you have period on that month and sort of trying to work out that kind of thing? Like how do you like start noticing that kind of thing?
Well, I started noticing it a few months ago, I'd say, when I can't remember, there was just a few days where I felt like I looked really bad every day, and then even in the photos that I had that people had taken of me, I just didn't like how I looked, and then I got my period like
The day after?
the day after or something.
Then you start linking the stuff to
Yeah, yeah,
period.
yeah. Then I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
"Oh, okay, that makes sense." And then, the next month I had the same problem again. And I think also not just my skin, but like my hair just doesn't look as healthy either. And
yeah. Mm.
I don't know if I put on more weight or if I just like get bloated.
Yeah. Sometimes it's both, I think.
Yeah, but I just generally don't like the way my body looks either. And then I feel like I don't fit into my clothes as well.
Mm.
Yeah, just so
Yeah.
many things. That's just in terms of physical appearance. Obviously, I feel like I have a lot less energy for socializing as well. And emotionally, I think I just tend to not be in a very good mood. Or I just get super anxious about stuff, like more than I would normally.
Mm-hmm.
Or just like something small happening, I'll have a bigger reaction to it than
Yeah,
I
it is
would.
with hormones. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's that. And I think I just get more easily overwhelmed by having to go to maybe because I'm an introvert, but yeah, I
Yeah.
just get more easily overwhelmed by having to go to social events.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, when your vagina is bleeding, it's really hard to focus on social events and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think I have like zero sex drive around my period.
Oh, yeah. So I read, and I think it can vary between different people. Speaking of which, actually, I think we were talking about sex during periods before, right? And
Yeah.
it was pretty interesting because you told me that in Korea, people say that it's unhygienic or just not safe to have sex when you're on your period.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about Korea, it's a scientific fact, actually. But I think it's just that in the West, they focus so much more on sexual pleasure than women's health that they don't really talk about this kind of stuff and they actually don't really care about this kind of thing. But like, we learn, I mean, I don't know if I learned this at school or something, but I probably learned it myself that it can be unsafe to have sex during periods because there's just so many reasons around it. And the things that I remember off the top of my head right now is that period blood, they can actually be a medium for the transmission of STDs like
Oh my God.
HIV and stuff like that. So that's why using condoms is a must at any time, but especially during period, it's a must to reduce that kind of risk. And I also know that like the cervix is slightly more open during period, and that can also increase the risk of STDs as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and also if you have sex, that can actually cause your menstrual blood flow backward into the body, which is not safe and naturally it's not healthy, right? It's the blood is coming out of your body for a reason every month, and it goes backward into your body, then it must not be healthy, right? And there's also actually some studies about it that this can actually increase the possibility of endometriosis. So
Oh
it's a
wow.
scientific fact, but we don't really talk about this at all in the West, right?
No, not at all. I mean, I
Not at
read so
all.
many well, okay, to be fair, like I didn't read any like academic research papers or anything scientific about it, but I read so many articles online just in magazines and newspapers and stuff about whether it's safe for women to have sex when they're on their period, and
Yeah.
everything was so focused on whether or not it's safe in terms of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And people were saying like, oh, even if you're on your period, there is a chance that you could get pregnant
Right.
depending on like where the egg and the sperm meet. So you
Yeah,
should
yeah.
use some kind of contraception to prevent pregnancy, but there was nothing about it being unsafe in terms of STDs and I guess
Mm-hmm.
the blood flow going backwards into your body.
Yeah.
And even a lot of magazines and newspapers were really promoting it as a good way to alleviate period cramps.
Oh my god. Because your sexual pleasure is overpowering?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like there was a lot of people
Wow.
saying like, oh, it's perfectly safe. Just make sure to like put a towel on the bed.
Yeah, yeah, that's like the one of the typical like, things that like a woman's magazine talks about, right? When it comes to having
Yeah.
sex during period. But you
So
know what?
true.
Speaking of which, I actually, asked this topic to my ChatGPT. He was like, "Oh, like having sex during period is not entirely bad or is not entirely unsafe, but it can create endometriosis and it can also give you STDs and stuff like that." I was like, what the hell? If it gives you like endometriosis and if it gives you like STDs, you should say like it's unsafe, right?
I feel like it's so typical though.
Yeah.
Like even on like birth control pills, like the hospitals and the doctors and just magazines and everything like tells us that it's safe to take birth control pills, right? And
Hmm.
then when you look at the side effects, it's like may cause death.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, it doesn't always lead to health problems, but then it can also make you die.
Yeah. So just generally when it comes to female bodies and female healthcare and everything, I feel like that attitude is just so typical. Like to say it's not unsafe, but you could die. Actually, speaking of cultural differences when it comes to periods, do you think there's anything else that
Hmm.
you've noticed that are cultural differences between Korea and Western countries?
Well, I think most Korean women use pads, not tampons,
Yeah.
which is a huge difference, compared to like America and other countries in the West, I think.
Yeah, that's so true because I feel like in Japan pads are so much more accessible and widely sold than tampons,
Right.
whereas in the UK it's the opposite probably.
Mm. What do you think is that though? Like, do you guys learn about how to use tampons, not pads at school? Or like, do parents actually teach you how to use tampons, like, instead of pads? Or do they teach you both?
I don't really know why there is this cultural difference about which one is used.
Yeah, I feel like there's just a lot of different types of factors that come in with this. But yeah, I don't exactly know why there's this culture difference. But I do use tampons though. Do you use tampons?
Not really in Japan because it's pretty hard to buy them.
So you used to use tampons back in the UK, but now you use sanitary pads in Japan?
I think in the UK I used like a mixture. And then in Japan, yeah, I don't really use tampons. I feel like I've always been kind of scared about tampons as well because how you can get really serious diseases if you leave it in for too long or something.
Yeah, you have to change it. Very timely.
Yeah, I can't remember remember what the name of the disease was, but
Yeah, I
I-
think sometimes it really depends, but sometimes it can actually make you pass out, or it can, yeah, give you a lot of different kinds of diseases. But I think it's not just about tampons though. Like whatever you put into your vagina, it can create a lot of different kinds of diseases, you know? Because it's inside internal, like it's in your body, like, and it's really sensitive muscles and everything. So I feel like you should be extra careful and extra hygienic about it, right? Make sure to wash your hands before like using tampons and everything. I always wash my hand before I use my tampons or change my tampons.
yeah, and I feel like nowadays this thing called a moon cup is really popular.
Oh yeah, I always wanted to try that, but I haven't. I heard that it's hygienic and also it's really eco-friendly because it's not like a one-time use thing. Yeah, I heard that it's a nice alternative. Have you tried that before?
No, I haven't tried it, but yeah, I've heard good things about it. But I think one thing I heard is that it can be a bit difficult if you're in a public toilet and
Because like you need to wash it.
yeah, there's no sink
Mm.
that you can use without getting out of your cubicle. Yeah, so that's one thing. But then actually, I was remember talking to a friend about it, and she said that you can leave it in for quite a long time. So she said that she usually would get home by the time she needs to change it,
Right,
anyways.
right. Oh my god. So efficient. And going back to cultural differences, I also wanted to ask what kind of words you use in the UK to avoid using the word period.
Oh my god. Okay, so
Or like what kind of expressions?
this is so crazy. So, I don't know, maybe people in like older generations, or I guess maybe younger generations use something different, or, I guess it depends what your friends use as well
Mm-hmm.
when you were growing up. But I remember when I was in school, we called it the curse.
Curse.
Yeah.
So how do you say it in your conversation? Like, oh, I got the curse.
Like, oh, I've got my curse right now.
Oh, I got my curse right now. Okay.
Which is so bad, right? Like,
So, but it's curse. Like, yeah,
yeah. So like internalized misogyny, right?
yeah, definitely.
Like if men got periods, can you imagine them calling it something like this?
Of course not. They would say it like God's gift or something.
What about you?
Like in Korea, the most common word to use to call period is magic.
Oh, okay, that's like the opposite of the cuss.
Yeah, it's interesting because like a Korean society is also like very like misogynistic, but like we use the word magic like as in, oh, I have my magic right now.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's like the opposite of the cuss.
Yeah. And sometimes we just use like phrases like that time of the month. So, for example, like in a conversation, we ask stuff like, oh, is it that time of the month for you? Like, then your friends may say, like, oh, yeah, it's that time of the month right now for me. So that's why I don't feel very well.
Mm.
Yeah, I just feel like there's just tons of different kinds of words and expressions to just avoid saying the word period, which is really ridiculous, right? Why don't we call periods? It's just a natural bodily function that happens to every woman, and we should be able to call it just the way it is.
Yeah, that's so crazy. So, what changes do you think we need to make either as women or as a society in general when it comes to this whole topic of periods and, trying to break the stigma around it and increase understanding and awareness?
Well, like we just said, I think we should really call periods, and don't use any euphemisms or any other words to say it because there's nothing to be ashamed of and there's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just something natural, and we should be able to say it really openly and freely in our daily conversations. And I think we also need to have a better education as well because I feel like I have zero memory. Like, for example, like there is no such thing as sex ed in the first place in Korea back in the days, I think.
Yeah.
And we don't really learn about periods in details. Like, we learn that we are gonna get it at some point in our lives, but Other than that, I don't think we get any other quality education about it. So we need to be taught at school about what period is actually like and what kind of responses it creates in our bodies and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I did hear from quite a few Japanese friends who grew up in Japan and went to local schools here that in Japan, when they have sex education class, the boys and the girls are taught separately. So they teach the girls about periods and then the boys about, I don't know what, like stuff that's happening in their own bodies. So then that means that boys never get to learn about periods.
That's why they make such bad jokes and ask them questions about periods, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like in the UK, even though boys learn about periods at school, they clearly have not been taught to absorb that information.
At all.
Or, yeah, or think about it seriously enough,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So, yeah, I think every country can do better when it comes to knowledge.
And I also don't understand why sanitary products are not free.
Yeah.
If you actually think about it, it's really a nonsense, I think.
Yeah, I feel like even the healthcare, like the state healthcare should provide it, you know?
Yeah, like every country has to provide the sanitary products for free, I think, because it's not a luxury item. Like half of the population in the world experiences periods, right? And for millions of girls, they don't really have access to sanitary products still these days as well. So having access to sanitary products is still a big challenge for so many women around the world. And it just doesn't make sense to me how they are not free when toilet paper is free in most public spaces. Then why not pads or tampons in public spaces, like in public toilets as well? Because
Mm.
like sanitary products are not luxury items, but then most of the times they are taxed in many countries and they are treated like it's optional, but they're just a basic necessity for us women, for every woman, right? We have it every month for like more than 40 years or something in our lives. And I don't understand why providing the products for free isn't included in our healthcare system. Yeah, so I think definitely there has to be a better healthcare system to break this stigma and to break this, period poverty around the world and everything. I mean, like, it's just so crazy to think about because, like in college, they give us free condoms, right?
Yeah.
Why do they not give us free pads or free tampons? Like, are free condoms more important than period pads and tampons? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's just an important and fundamental and natural part of our life, but then nobody really thinks about it as something that they need to think about at a national level.
Yeah,
They
that's so
always make
true.
it so personal, right? That it's our own thing that we need to take care of.
Yeah, but then at the same time, abortion is seen as state decision, right?
Yeah. So true. So true. Like, I just don't get it.
Yeah, but one thing that I think has recently been innovative in this space is period tracking apps, which, help women track when their period is going to come and to work out how they're feeling at what time of month and
Hmm.
try to see patterns in how they're feeling at different times of the cycle. And I think it's just a good way to kind of equip us with a knowledge about our bodies that maybe we were not previously encouraged to explore or try to learn about. So
Right.
I think that's something good.
Yeah.
And I recently read these two nonfiction books, which are kind of related to this topic. One is called The Vagina Business: Innovative Breakthroughs That Could Change Everything in Women's Health by Marina Gerner. And that book is basically about all these new technologies and new healthcare products that are being made to try to deal with specific problems in women's health that have been ignored for a long time by medical healthcare. But the book also talks about how it's really difficult to get funding for these kinds of things because they're often seen as a kind of luxury or optional item, even though they're not. Yeah, so that book is pretty interesting. And the other one that I read recently is called Invisible Women Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. And that book basically talks about how there's just so much data bias when it comes to healthcare and just women's well-being in general. And she also talks a lot about access to sanitary products, access to menstrual products, access to public toilets, and everything like that. So those two books I thought were pretty interesting in talking about these issues, about how as a society we can definitely do better when it comes to paying attention to women's health.
Right, definitely. And we hope we could cover these books in our later episode down the road, because we wanted to do an interview episode about these topics with one of our friends, right? Yeah, thanks for the recommendation. All right, that's it for today's episode. If there is one thing that I hope you take away from this episode, it's that period is not something to be ashamed of. It's natural and it's powerful and it's part of life for billions of people, billions of women around the world. It's a topic that affects our health, equality, and most importantly, our daily life. So I think it's about time we bring it to our conversation. So let's talk about it more openly and more freely, because the more we talk about it, the closer we get to breaking the stigma around it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to our latest episode, and if you liked it, please share with a friend.
We'd also really appreciate if you could rate and review our podcast. And please get in touch if you have any feedback.
We'll be back again with another episode next week.